Welcome to the Creative Penn podcast. I'm Joanna Penn, thriller author and creative entrepreneur, bringing you interviews, inspiration and information on writing craft and creative business. You can find the episode show notes, your free author blueprint and lots more at thecreativepenn.com, and that's Penn with a double N. And here's the show. Hello creatives, I'm Joanna Penn, and this is episode number 760 of the podcast, and it is Wednesday the 3rd of July 2024 as I record this. In today's show, I'm talking about preparing your manuscript for pitching agents with Renee Fountain, who is both an agent and a developmental editor. And of course, even if you're not pitching agents, preparing your manuscript for publication is just as important. So however you choose to publish, you will find this interesting. We discuss the main issues with manuscripts, how to tell if it is overwritten, and thoughts on pacing. Then the elements of a pitch package and query letter, the pros and cons of traditional publishing, and will they really do all the marketing for you, dealing with rejection and more. So that's coming up in the interview section. In publishing things, there is an article on self-publishing advice on referencing and citations. So first of all, why is it important to provide external evidence to support our arguments, to be open and honest about where we get our ideas from, and to make it easy for our readers to find our sources so they can double check or read more about the subject at hand, which is why I share it. A lot of my readers like to investigate further. From the article, which is on selfpublishingadvice.org, we cite other people's work to make sure our own work is clear, supported, verifiable, and honest. These principles are the bedrock of intellectual integrity. Now, intellectual integrity has a nemesis called plagiarism. Citations are the safety net that prevent us from falling into the trap of accidental plagiarism. So there are tips on moral aspects as well as legal aspects of avoiding copyright infringement, key copyright principles that apply to citations, fair use, permissions, and then also the mechanics, whether that is in text, footnotes, or in a bibliography, which is what I tend to do. And I always cite my sources and inspiration. As Cormac McCarthy said, books are made out of books. And I love sharing where my ideas originate from for fiction and my research process. And for non-fiction, I always have a very substantial bibliography and references per chapter. For me, it's all part of the fun of writing. There's also an article on how to do indexing or outsource it. So that's on selfpublishingadvice.org, links in the show notes. And in AI things, the Wall Street Journal has a fantastic interview with multi-award-winning musician and entrepreneur will.i.am. And it is on YouTube, so you can watch it. It is an in-person interview on AI, creators and the media industry. And it's such a positive spin. I love will.i.am. He's so inspirational. His birthday's also just a few days from mine. We're the same age. And he's one of those people I look at and go, yeah, maybe I could have achieved more. But if you don't know him, will.i.am was in the Black Eyed Peas. So if you're Generation X, you will know him. He's also a solo artist and producer, music producer. He's on the TV show The Voice. He's a mentor to musicians, but he's also an entrepreneur and CEO and business guy. And in technology and AI, he's been starting and acquiring AI and technology companies for over a decade. In the interview, he talks through the disruptive technology shifts we have already seen so far with the internet, mobile, social media, and all the disruption that has caused and streaming, and how AI is going to be even more disruptive. But he criticises existing business models for musicians and says that the time of AI is a time to remake things. He says, quote, "Right now is the time for the dreamers because you have dream materialization tools. To try to do it the way it was yesterday, well, that's not a big dream. You could now literally just reimagine and dream up tomorrow with today's tools." He also stresses the importance of getting involved and the need to have more diverse voices involved. It's like a new frontier, he says, where we've got to make sure every voice is heard. AI needs to reflect the diverse, rich tapestry of all our communities. And I totally agree with this. And it's why I have for many years, stressed the need to learn about these tools, use them, shape them, make them into what we need them to be, what we want them to be. Or the tech is just going to develop without us, and people from every race and religion and cultural background and yes, political persuasion need to be involved. And will.i.am demos a voice model with an African American female voice. And he also talks about how he is excited about tools like Udio, which is text to music. He says, quote, "It is freaking fantastic, amazing technology. It's mind-blowing what you're able to do with AI and composition. It's going to be mind-blowing what you're going to be able to do with AI and storytelling. The technology is giving agency to dreamers, to folks that have visions and imagination." So in one sense, I'm like, damn, this freaking machine can make beats better than me. And look, to be honest, this sounds a lot better in the voice of will.i.am, but I'm obviously not going to try. But yes, I love this. He basically says, yeah, this machine can make beats better than me. That's real. But then I'm like, damn, this machine's going to allow me to have one idea that can multiply 1,000 ideas. It's the age of the ideator. Not yesterday's traditional artists. I'm still creating. I'm just creating differently. It's such a great interview. It's about half an hour. And yes, he focuses more on music because that's his medium of creation. But all the principles apply to us as writers. It's about half an hour. And as I said, it's clearly better in his voice. You can watch the video. It's on YouTube. Links in the show notes. But just to repeat that, it's the age of the ideator, and I'm still creating. I'm just creating differently. So important. I hope that inspires you and you go and have a listen to that. In personal news, I have an interview on the Book Brunch website about pilgrimage, why I wrote it, my writing process, why I write different kinds of books at different times to keep myself creatively fresh, why I am an indie author, balancing marketing with writing and more. So that's on bookbrunch.co.uk, and that's because I won the Selfies Award earlier in the year for Pilgrimage, and that Book Brunch site is mainly a traditional publishing focused site, so it's kind of cool to have an interview there. So I'm recording this early as I'm heading to the Do Lectures in West Wales. It is a different kind of conference for creative business people. I'm attending, not speaking, and I may well be the only fiction author there. It tends to be a lot of different businesses, a lot of solopreneurs, creative people, but not necessarily in the fiction space. So I'm hoping to bring back insights from other industries. I feel the need to kind of get out of my comfort zone with author conferences and go to something different. So I'm sure I will share some lessons and thoughts next week. Now, thanks for all your emails and comments and photos this week. On X, T.S. Pedramon said, listening to the podcast right now while clearing out a large storage shelf I put in the garage of my old house. The joys of moving. And there's some lovely pictures of him in front of boxes in the garage and up on a platform, which is very cool. I love a little glimpse into your life. Beth also emailed in response to my question about would you let someone else finish your books if you died? She says, the writer was my father. I was the illustrator and comic creator, but my father died right as his first book was being published, leaving me to work with the publisher to release the book. His final words to me, aside from I love you, was to protect his books. I took that to mean stewardship, and now I'm honoured to edit and publish his literary estate of over 50 books. Wow, Beth, and I love that you're honouring your dad in that way. That's a huge thing to take on. But yes, fantastic. And I certainly didn't mean to be critical of that kind of thing. It was just a really interesting thought, whether as the creator you would want someone to carry that on. Beth also sent a picture from a path through some beautiful woods in Mount Seymour in North Vancouver, which was beautiful. Also on X, now I love this story, this made me so happy. Mwana Bibi Sikamo said, I often listen to The Creative Penn, and apart from a wealth of information about the craft of writing, I was intrigued by her love of cemeteries. She is always raving about them, and I never thought to visit if it wasn't for a funeral. So one Sunday I decided to visit Ilmame Cemetery. It's down the road from me in Rhodes Park, Lusaka in Zambia. And the little chapel at the front has always drawn me. And I went and visited this chapel on Google Maps. It is beautiful little chapel, and there's some pictures on the X thread as well, which I'll link to. Going back to the post, I was a little apprehensive at first, but it's such a peaceful spot. I was soon engrossed in the stories told by the tombs. I noticed some had flags on them, but then the guide showed me how the cemetery that was established in 1922 was segregated. Yes, each race had its own section. Even in death, there was a need to establish hierarchy. The visit left me buzzing with ideas for stories, but it took over a year for this one to form and then get published. The cemetery is central to the plot, but there's also reparations, indigenous knowledge, African spirituality, and Zambian World War II soldiers fighting for the British. The Tomb of the Forgotten Soldier is now published in Fia, the magazine of black speculative fiction, issue 31. I love this story, so thank you for sharing, Mwana Bibi. I just think this is brilliant, wonderful story, lovely photos. And while I have never been to Zambia, I went to school in Blantyre in Malawi, which, if people don't know, borders Zambia. And we lived there back in the early 80s. And I had real fun on Google Maps because I went to look at this chapel and then I kind of scrolled over to the right where Malawi is and went back to some of the places I remember. I haven't been since 1986, but it made me want to return. Such a beautiful area of the world. So thank you for that. That is so fantastic. I am thrilled that I got you to go visit this chapel and this graveyard and that it inspired a story. Okay, please leave a comment on the podcast show notes at thecreativepenn.com or on the YouTube channel, or message me on X at thecreativepenn, or email me and send me pictures of where you're listening, joanna@thecreativepenn.com. I love to hear from you. It makes this more of a conversation. So today's show is sponsored by Publisher Rocket, which helps you with keyword and category research on Amazon, which you need for your metadata when self-publishing, as well as helping you generate lists of keywords for Amazon ads. You can do this manually on Amazon, but it takes a lot more time, and you have to think of all the different permutations to search for. And I found that Publisher Rocket saves me so much time and frustration that I use it for every book in every genre I publish. It makes the process easy, which, let's face it, is what we need so we can get back to writing. You can use it to find keywords that readers actually type into Amazon search. You can also learn about other authors' sales with the competitor analysis, which I often use to find categories I want my book to appear in. Plus, you can discover best-selling book categories and niche categories, which you can use to write to market if that's your thing, and you can find profitable keywords for Amazon ads and easily export them. You can also search separately for the US, UK and German stores, as well as for ebooks, audiobooks or print books, and in English or German. Publisher Rocket is a one-time payment and you get 30 days money-back guarantee, and you can start researching for your keywords, categories and competition right away. There are also some great tutorials to help, but I personally find it pretty intuitive to use. Publisher Rocket is one of my must-use tools as part of my publishing process, and it is very reasonably priced. So go check it out at publisherrocket.com. That's publisherrocket.com. So this type of corporate sponsorship pays for the hosting, transcription and editing, but my time in creating the show is sponsored by my community at patreon.com/thecreativepenn. Thanks to the 2 new patrons who've joined since last week, and thanks to everyone who's been supporting for months and years. If you join the community, you get access to all my backlist videos and audio covering topics on creativity, mindset, business, marketing, AI and more, and my patron-only Q&A solo podcast episodes, of which there were quite a lot. So if you'd like lots more audio with me talking about publishing and writing and marketing and business and all of that, come and join us. Last week I put out some audiobook chapters from The Relaxed Author to give everyone a little bit of calm in a very politically charged week for many of us. The Patreon is a monthly subscription, the equivalent of a black coffee a month or a couple of coffees if you're feeling generous, and you get access to everything. So if you feel you get value from the show and you want more, come on over and join us at patreon.com, patreon.com/thecreativepenn. Right, let's get into the interview. Renee Fountain has more than 3 decades in the publishing industry, including being a literary agent, a developmental editor, and story analyst. She is the president of Gandolfo, Helin and Fountain Literary Management, and founder of Gryphon Quill Editing. So welcome to the show, Renee.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Yes, indeed. So first up, tell us a bit more about you and how you got into the publishing industry and what you do now.
Well, I've loved books since I was a little kid. I was that kid getting yelled at for reading under the covers with a flashlight when I was supposed to be sleeping. So after a bunch of boring jobs, I wanted to do something I love. So I was living in San Diego at the time, and Harcourt Brace was the only publisher there, and I thought, I'm going to do that. So I started in the very boring division of accounting guides before landing a coveted spot in children's books. I eventually moved back to New York City just in time for 9/11, so that kind of dashed my hopes growing my publishing empire. But now I'm wearing a few hats. I'm a literary agent. I mean, when I did come back to New York, I did go with Simon & Schuster eventually. So now I'm wearing a few hats. I'm a literary agent. I'm a developmental editor working with writers in my private business. Also on the faculty of Manuscript Academy, working with writers there. And I'm writing reviews for Kirkus Indie because it's one of the few ways I get to keep my own writing skills sharp while dipping my toe in the indie pool.
A portfolio career, as they call it.
Sure, why not?
I say I'm a multi-passionate creative. Don't put me in a one genre box. Now, when you pitched me, it was really interesting. You said, I get a lot of manuscript submissions that are just not query ready. And I was like, oh my goodness, it's a super juicy topic. So let's get into that. What are the main issues you see with those manuscript submissions?
Well, mostly it's the writing, whether at a line level or the overall story structure. It could be the writing isn't strong enough yet. The word count may be too high for the genre they're writing. It's mostly due to, again, the loose writing, bad pacing, excessive description, or the scene goes on way too long, or what I call story for story's sake is just telling the reader a lot of stuff that doesn't really matter in the big picture, no matter how interesting it is. And you'll know if you have that, if you take out that section and it still makes sense. So it's just a lot of things just aren't quite gelling yet. And I've talked to so many people that just like, well, I want to work on a new project, so I just need to get it out there. Like it's a time limit. You got to shove it out the door. And then you really don't. You really need to take your time.
So there's a few things to come back on there. I want to address the word count first because this is really interesting and people don't really understand why word count is an issue. Could you talk a bit more about word count for some of the most common genres and why it's a problem if it goes on too long?
Well, I hear a lot of talk about, they say that for my first book, I shouldn't exceed X amount of words. Well, if your story holds it, then it's fine. The problem is when that you say, oh, Renee, I've written this 150,000 word romance. It's like, probably not. I mean, I know you wrote it, but you probably have a lot of stuff in there that doesn't need to be there. So genre in general has a word count that you should kind of be shooting for. You know, a thriller can be done between 70 and 90, depending on the story. Fantasy is one of the few things that are going to go above 100. But that's really what we're looking for. You know, you talk about red flags when you see a query. It's like, if I see a 150,000 word romance, I know there's a problem.
So back in the day, I understood it to be that word count was very much about spine size. So you mentioned there thrillers, 70 to 90,000. And I write thrillers, but I write shorter thrillers than that. I mean, 70 would be the highest. But now when most books are sold online, how big a deal is spine size, or is it more about, for example, editorial budget for 150,000 words is much more than, say, a 60,000 word book?
Well, I mean, with George R.R. Martin still getting published with his microscopic font and his giant 1,000+ page books, like I say, he's still sticking in genre. But I don't know how much times have changed now. I mean, editing in the big five, they really want you to do all that heavy lifting before it gets to them. Things have evolved. It's changed. But I never really kind of thought of it in terms of spine size so much as what the story tends to hold. So if you've ever seen a 150,000 page romance, that's quite the book. And you have to imagine it's overwritten. Now, is opposed going the other direction of having something where the word count is too small. Like if you said, Renee, I wrote this 52,000 word romance or whatever it is, the problem becomes pricing at that point. They really like the sweet spot of around 70. They really don't like it under that because of the pricing issue.
Yeah, this is so funny. I feel like we've been so boxed in with pricing because of Amazon's $9.99 cap as well. But I read a lot of nonfiction too, and nonfiction can be shorter and readers will pay more. It really is only a fiction issue with pricing, I think.
Yeah, you expect nonfiction to be a slightly lower count, somewhere in the 60s and higher, depending on the topic. I think where nonfiction comes in is that you can be more direct in whatever it is the issue that you're talking about. And it can go higher. If it's a narrative nonfiction, you're going to another 350 page book. So it all varies within there too. But yes, they can hold a lower count.
Well, let's come back to the word overwritten. You know what that means, but it's very hard to know what it means when you're the author. What are some ways that an author could analyze their own manuscript to find whether or not they have overwritten? Or you mentioned story for story's sake. How do people know that they have these problems without working with an editor first?
Well, I mean, I think with a lot of stuff with authors, it's tough because you could be a great writer, but you've been working on it so long, you can't see the forest for the trees anymore. And your brain fills in all the gaps. So sometimes it's hard to see it for yourself. And that's where you get a fresh pair of eyes, whether that's a professional editor or whether that's another author that you admire, their books are good. Anybody who understands pacing, because that's where it's all going to come into, is the fact that you have the story for story's sake and that you're writing this long scene and you're describing everything on the person's desk and everything on the walls, trying to quote, set the scene. But none of it is really that important. You're giving the reader a lot to remember and think about. Whereas if on that desk was a secret relic, that magical thing, yeah, you're going to say among the pens and the other stuff that you've got this relic. And that's the part we're going to remember. But the idea is if you take some of this extraneous stuff out and the story keeps moving forward, like you've not missed, like you had to know about this part. You, of course, don't take that stuff out. But when you take that stuff out and nothing is missed and the story is still whole, that's when you know you're just giving a lot of information. I've read books where the information was fun. I enjoyed reading it, but in the real big picture, it didn't have anything to do with it. And it was just taking up a lot of real estate for no productive reason.
Yeah, and you also mentioned before that feeling of just get it out there. And I totally understand that. I mean, sometimes we're just sick of our own books. And interestingly, as self-published authors, obviously we can just upload, publish, and it can be selling the same day. So there is a sort of positive sense of getting it out there more quickly. What tips can you give us around patience or coming back to something with fresh eyes? Like, how can we do that? Is it just a matter of leaving it aside for a time?
Well, yeah. And actually, I wrote an article on that on my Substack of patience pays off, in the sense that with you guys that, and especially you, Joanna, that have had a lot of books out there, you know what to do here and you know when your stuff is finished. But these first time authors, a lot of the times are like, I just have to hurry up and get this published. And they don't realize that you're just detracting from the possibility because you don't get a second bite at the apple. And usually when you're tired of that project, or it's not quite right, or you haven't sent it to an editor, or as I said, other person that can give you actual feedback, put it in the drawer for a little while. I mean, this is why painters turn around their paintings, so they don't look at it for a couple of days. And when they turn it back around, they can see where the improvement needs to be made. So there is no deadline to rush it out the door as a traditional publishing person, because no one will pick it up because it's not ready. And you knew that when you did it, but you were just hoping that someone would love it enough to fix it. And that rarely happens.
You also mentioned pacing a couple of times. What are some tips around making sure pacing is going well?
Well, that's hand in hand with the overwriting and bringing scenes that last way too long, is that you're getting mired down in all these details that really aren't moving the story forward or enhancing your story in any way. So that will drag down the pacing. So if I'm slogging through 3-4 pages of what's on a person's desk, only to have someone walk in and say, hey, would you like that glass of water now? And you leave the room. What was that for? I'm not saying that everything has to happen in a split second, and I can appreciate the slow burn, but there's that fine line between just having the words there just to have them rather than having them be productive and add to the story. Because if you're spending a lot of time writing about things, introducing a character, oh, he was bullied as a child and now he's got these dark thoughts and on, and then all of a sudden he's gone. You never see him again. He just got off the school bus and you decided to tell me all about this person who got off the school bus, but he doesn't show up again. If you take that out, it doesn't affect the story, but you leaving it in, I'm reading this, and that's kind of slogging the pacing a little bit.
I feel like the biggest shift of this, certainly for me as a writer who's been doing this a while now, is changing my head from my author head to a reader head. And obviously as an editor, you're acting as a reader as well. But how can we do that? I mean, I guess we've talked about getting some distance. For example, I'll tell you how I do my own self edits is I will print out my draft 2 pages to a page, so it looks more like a book, so you could fold it up and it would be like a book. And then I hand edit with a pen on paper and I scribble all over it, and the font I use is different, so it's not on the screen. And so this kind of helps me disconnect. So I guess, have you got any tips for other people who to change your head around?
I think that's a great tip. It's a matter of stepping away, getting some fresh eyes, and then doing something like that, or reading it out loud. If you're reading it out loud, especially with your dialogue, I mean, that's how a great way to fix dialogue of that's going on too long or is too on the nose or whatever, is to read it out loud. And then you can see that you're going on and on and on about something. You're like, well, I could say this so much more succinctly and still have way more impact and not lose anything in the story as a whole.
Yeah, it is difficult. And again, it's very interesting. I think it takes a number of books before an author can be more confident in their voice. How have you seen authors develop their voice over the years? Is it just a matter of creative confidence over time?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I have a client that I've worked with a number of times, and he's a veteran, and he's writing. It feels like it's more cathartic for him. It's a lot of very angry stuff. It's not necessarily well thought out, etc. And then a couple of months later, I'll hear from him again. A year later, I'll hear from him again. And he's like, I wrote this new romance thing. He goes, I know it's away from me, but you see, he's got it all out of his mind. And this stuff was way different. And that's what I would tell him. He's like, do you think we should submit the other stuff? I said, you know what? Step away for a little while and go back to it. And then you'll see that you got out what you wanted to say, but maybe now you know how you want to say it a little bit more gently, a little bit more productively, if you would. And he's done that. And he's come back and said, you're right. I realized it was not ready to be sent. So
yeah, that takes some maturity.
Yeah. And you get that with your practicing of writing. The more you write, the more mature you get. I mean, I could see how my writing's changed. I was reading stuff from 1985 and I was laughing. I'm like, oh my God, what was I thinking?
Yeah. In 2022, I rewrote my first 3 novels, which I had self-published in 2009, 2010. So, and I was like, I've become a lot better writer. And because those 3 novels were the beginning of a 13-book series, it felt important to rewrite. And it's funny, you said earlier, you don't get a second bite of the apple or whatever, but as independent authors, we do, in that we can do that. But I think you meant if you're pitching an agent or Yeah. Although people get their rights back, don't they? And often rewrite things.
Well, that's a road that you can't go back to the traditional. And that's the same thing as an indie writer. You cannot pitch most, I'm not saying every, most agents, including myself, cannot take anything that's been previously published in any way, whether it was just online, whether it was out there online, but it didn't sell anything. I can't have anything because in traditional publishing contracts, it's going to state that this has never been out there. Now, if it's been a long time and you have rewritten 80% of the book, you know what I mean? It's different then. And it's the same with the second bite of the apple for when you're sending to an agent. Do you know how many times it's very frustrating for an agent to get, here's my manuscript, I hope you'll love it. And then literally a week later, oh, I redid a whole bunch of sections. Here's the new one. Try this one instead.
Yeah.
And someone has done that to me like 4 times. And I'm like, no, I can't. And then it was like, oh, I've sent this. And then there was times where I've gotten one that said, I sent this to you last year. You gave me some great notes on it. I wanted you to know I completely rewrote it. Will you look at it again? And that is usually very okay, to do that way.
Right, we're going to come back to the agent stuff, but let's just talk about developmental editing, because you do that. I feel like the word editor is so difficult because it can mean so many things. So what does a developmental editor do that is different to a line editor, a copy editor, sort of red marks all over the page?
A developmental editor could still give you red marks, but they look at the whole big picture. I myself can't help myself from line editing because I'll see it and I'm like, no, that's not right. So I'll do a little of that as well. But otherwise, they look to see that the story starts in the right place. The scenes are all necessary and productive, like we talked about before, meaning they serve a purpose to the story and move the story forward, back to pacing. They often see where the story can be improved by moving some things around, adding or deleting things, of coming up, something is said a certain way. You can say, hey, what if you said it this way? Or what if you told that in dialogue? Or what if you showed it this way? So that's what they do. It's just like moving things around. Where line editors and copy editors are down to the nitty gritty of grammar, continuity, cohesiveness of style, consistency, making sure the words used relay the intention that the writer was trying to. I took a copy editing class through the University of Chicago, and that was very not for me. You have to keep a style sheet. There's a lot of technical things that go along with it. And it's a completely different animal.
Yeah, I think you have to go with what your strengths are and seeing that story as a whole, I think. Interesting. You said this, checking whether the story starts in the right place. And I feel like some people won't understand what you mean by that. So could you expand on that?
Sure. I just read one recently where I got all this information, all this preamble, and nothing was really happening. There was like no inciting incident. Nothing was really happening in like the first 10 pages. And then by the time I got to like chapter 3, some major event happened. And now it was off to the races. And I said, you might want to bring that in the beginning and less preamble of where nothing was going on, because an editor's not going to read. And, as an agent, I can read like in the first 5 pages to see voice and style and everything like that. And you've got to get to certain benchmarks, or you got to stop turning the pages because it's taking too long to get there. And like I said, fine line between slow burn and bad pacing.
Yeah, and even if it's a slow burn, you've got to hook the reader. So I read on a Kindle, I read fiction on a Kindle, and I'm pretty much a 3-click on a Kindle Paperwhite. So, I mean, that's not many pages. If I download a sample, I'll know pretty quickly whether I want to read something. And then if I get to the end of the sample, I will usually buy the book because I am hooked in. But that inciting incident, something happening, is like a genre specific thing, right? The reader has to know this is the book I want to read now.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're showing what this character is going to go on a journey to get a want and a need. And we got to know what sets them on that journey. And you're going to want to know that within a certain period of time, or we're just reading about these people's lives and it's not really going anywhere. If you're, as a reader, sitting there and you're a couple chapters in going, what's happening? Where's this going? And it's harder to say that when you guys are, if you're reading like a finished book as opposed to submissions that come in. And I'm talking about traditional again. So there's certain kind of rules that are adhered to in a sense. I mean, not hard and fast, the rule's meant to be broken.
Yeah, it's tough. Okay, so once the manuscript is in shape, many authors want to pitch an agent. So what are the key elements of a pitch package that authors need to put together in order to make it through the first mass delete of their emails?
Well, yeah, a strong query letter is key. I'm actually going to be teaching a masterclass at StoryFest in South Carolina on this because it's the first thing that gets you noticed. It's like one of the basic things, but it takes a lot of practice and patience to get it just right. So you want to have your strong query letter, keep it to a single page. 250 to 350 words is best. If it takes more, that's fine. But succinctness and showing that you can tell your story and give all this information shows that you've tightened your writing up. If I'm reading a 3-page query letter, I'm going to guess that their manuscript is overwritten as well. So it's very important to have that. I've created a helpful template for query letters that can be found on my site under the resource tabs. That's free for anybody to use. I did a proposal one as well, and it kind of walks you through the process. And that brings me to a synopsis. You should have a 1 to 2 page synopsis on hand in case an agent asks for it. I always ask for them. And it's because you're going to invest a lot of time reading these books. And while the voice and the writing seem great, 4 or 5 hours into this book, you don't want to suddenly see this, it goes off the rails and suddenly there's a donkey flying through the air throwing glitter everywhere. And you're like, wait, what just happened? So you don't get the time back. So when I'm reading and I see the voice and the structure and everything is all lining up, I like to look at the synopsis to see the story arc itself, to see how it's going to play out. And sometimes I can see errors there and say, listen, that doesn't really track. So, and I may read forward before I make my assessment. They just maybe didn't write the synopsis as strong as they should, but I'll still read forward to see if it actually played out in the manuscript. And if you're a nonfiction author, strong query letter and a strong proposal is very key. And like I said, templates under my resources if you want to take a look at that.
Just so people know, what website should they be looking for there?
It's reneefountain.com.
Great. We'll come back to that at the end. But just on the query letter, let's just cover a bit more detail now. So obviously we need to talk about the story or the nonfiction project, whatever it is. But should we also include elements of our sales, our platform? Like I'm an established indie author, or there might be newer indie authors than me, but should we be including that information as well to kind of talk more about the author? We're always told we should talk about author platform, basically.
Yeah, you should, because indie or traditional, whether it's understood that you are going to be the marketer of your book. You're going to do most of the heavy lifting. Traditional publishing will do like very basic stuff, but it's up to the author. And when traditional publishers looking at a book, definitely if you have a strong platform, if you have a lot of high sales, that will get you absolutely looked at. So definitely showing that you have a strong platform and high sales is great. You can say, I'm a successful indie author making my traditional publishing debut, and go on after that in your letter. And at the end, you can talk about your sales but we're talking, your sales have to be fairly high. If you say, 3,000 is great, I would be very impressed with that. But publishers want to see it as high as possible. And at the converse of that, if you don't have any sales or you don't have a high platform, take the time to start building your platform more, your followers, your social media, all that for your reach. And just because you don't have any sales, don't let that stop you. Everybody starts somewhere. So if it's not impressive, don't talk about it. If it is impressive, absolutely. Put it in red, put it in big giant letters.
Yeah. But start with the story. So I guess I'm writing to pitch this project. Here's a bit about the story, and then here's my platform. And then if you're interested, let me know. So should we pitch multiple agents at the same time?
Yes. Yeah, but not in a way that you're just throwing a bunch of stuff against the wall to see what sticks. Research the agents.
So what are some tips for finding a good match for a book and an author? Because there's a lot of agents out there.
Yes. It's simply the research. Whether you've read a book that you think, that you really like, you're like, this is just like mine, or this is the type of book that this agent handles. Look in the acknowledgments. Find out who the agent is for that book. Look on Publishers Marketplace, Manuscript wish list. I think Writer's Digest provides some guidance. I thought I saw something from Reedsy not too long ago where they put up the agents that should be. I wasn't among them, by the way. I stay off the grid. I don't use Query Tracker or other similar sites because they're probably a good place, but that's not the way I work. Attend writing events like PNWA or Killer Nashville or whatever fits in your genre to see their list of agents. They post them up there, who's attending, what they're looking for. And just, you can go back for the last 2 or 3 years and I think you can garner a lot of information that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's better to pitch, I guess, 5 agents you've heavily researched than just scattergunning 25.
It's not good. It's not good
Yeah.
to just throw it out there. But also, too, remember, you want to work with this person. Maybe there are agents that you've identified from past things that you've been doing or books that you've seen or authors. Then pitch them first. Maybe you have your top 5 or whatever it is, and then pitch ones that are relevant to what you're doing. But don't pitch a military author or an agent, your romance book, So.
Yeah, very important. And are agents and publishers open to indie authors pitching? I mean, you mentioned there, if you have a good platform, mention it. If you don't mention it. But are they open to it? I mean, obviously, even if you don't mention it, you're going to have to mention it when you have a conversation.
Yeah, no, it's not something to hide at all. I'm just saying what will kind of work for you and what will work against you. Saying, I'm an indie author. I didn't do very well and I have no sales, but that really is like, well... You don't want to lead with that. No, but absolutely agents are open to it. Just like I said, you can't pitch a book that you've already published unless you said, listen, I published this. I've sold 50,000 copies. They'll be like, very interested. You hear about those Wattpad sensations where they had 1 million Wattpad followers. And then I think it was Simon & Schuster who swooped in and grabbed her. So it depends. But yeah, you should absolutely go out there, but just not with a previously published book.
Yeah, I think that's really important. The other thing is, you mentioned before, quite briefly, that you are the marketer. And I feel like a lot of authors turn away from being an indie author these days because they don't want to do the marketing. So what sort of marketing can they expect with a traditional publisher? Like you said, they do a little bit. What is that little bit?
Yeah, they'll notify, like they have a stable of reviewers that they'll send it to. They might include it in some kind of roundup, a handful of, they're not going to send you on a book tour. You're not going to go on signings. They're not, you don't know how many times I get these submissions that say, I just want to go with a traditional publisher because I want them to do all the marketing for me. Well, that doesn't work. They want you to be, again, your platform. That's why it's important to raise your numbers. They want you to have a ready-made audience who's already interested in what you have to say and what you're writing and a fan of your work. They want you to go on podcasts and be a guest on a podcast or a blogger or something where you're talking about your book. And some people have access to television shows and they go on there and talk about their books. I had a sports agent who would be invited to talk about sports and then he'd say, and then here's my new book, So you still have to do the main heavy lifting. Sometimes traditional publishers will say, depending on what your book is, maybe they'll have a set of magazines that would work well for a piece that you could write an article on or something to that effect. But again, it's only when you're front list, it's only leading up to your launch. And then they're on to the new front list book to give them the attention. So you've really got to try to get the irons in the fire yourself as well. It's an unfortunate part. I didn't say it was easy.
No, it's not easy either way. And it's funny because I feel like people think that one way, traditionally published authors think going indie is the easy way. And indies often think, oh, I'll just go traditional because then I won't have to do marketing.
Mm-hmm. No.
So it's like there's pros and cons either way. But given what you said, so what are the benefits of going traditional?
I was going to ask the indie people that question myself.
But from your perspective.
I think a lot of people, it's kind of a goal for them. And it is kind of fun. I mean, not for nothing. You're having bragging rights of saying, St. Martin's took my book. That's great. That's quite a feather in your cap. And I think you should do that if that's what you want to do. I always tell my clients, sometimes, the publishing landscape is tough. It really is. And I will try so long. Sometimes it takes me 2 years to sell their book, depending on what it is. But I will do everything I could, send it out, get some feedback. And when I say, listen, I think I've exhausted all my possibilities, at least they have the option of self-publishing, a smaller press, going to a hybrid, whatever they want to do to get their book out there. Because I believed in that book enough to go, and I'd love to see it out there too. So you got your bragging rights, the nice feather in your cap, something that I think is something, it is wonderful. But you're also, look at the other side. You're giving up a big piece of your pie. You're still doing a lot of the marketing. You may have better distribution the other way. I don't know about in the UK, but we don't have many brick and mortar stores anymore. They've all been reduced to online. I think there's a couple of Barnes and Nobles left, but this still happens. There's still airports and all that you could try to get your book into. But I think there's definitely pros and cons to both sides.
Yeah, indeed. And one of the other things I was considering around this is film and TV rights, because your agency looks at that. I mean, there are agents who have relationships with film and TV agents or studios. Is that a better way to go as well? For example, I pitched to a person in TV a while back and they said, oh, why isn't your literary agent doing that for you? And I was like, oh, well, I'm doing it myself because I'm not with an agent. So do you think that it's the benefit to have an agent do that, or that there's a better chance of getting a film or TV deal that way?
I think some of them require, just like the big five requires you to have an agent. It's because they don't want to deal directly with the author. So that's why they want to have the intermediate of an agent, to make sure you have representation, make sure that you have someone saying, they said this, but really this is what's going to happen, So that's the pro to having an agent to do that kind of stuff. But for the most part, film and television, I don't know if it's like Amazon Studios doesn't require an agent, or some of those, those that have popped up in the last few years. But film and TV, for the most part, are going off of a great story. A lot of times could be high sales figures that catch their eye, but it also has to do with, what's working at the time. Hallmark, Lifetime, they're always looking for new stories that fit their profile and demographics, and they want an agent to send them their stuff. But when I was optioning books for film and TV at Harcourt, I was obviously only working with my own books, but I would have celebrity managers calling me up going, do you have a female driven vehicle? She was representing Cher. And it's like, well, I'll see what I have. But when I was a scout for CW Television Network, I looked for the story and what was interesting, whether it was indie or not. It could have been a magazine article, but whatever worked for adaptation. So I was doing double duty back then, running a book review site. And so I was reading all sorts of different things. But so in that aspect, just because you're an indie author doesn't mean you can't pursue that avenue. And there are some agents that just do, like, I don't represent scripts, so I don't go the other way, but there might be some other agents that take your book, your indie book, and sell for film rights. We tend to work with just the books that we represent when we do that.
And then just coming back to something you said earlier about, like, if you take on a manuscript, for example, and it might take a few years or it might not even happen. So what stops a publisher publishing a book or taking on a book? Is it just that their list, they don't want that kind of book right now, or a timing problem? Like, if it's gone past your level of quality, there's this next level at a publishing house.
Yeah, it could be a lot of things. A rejection by them would be, this doesn't quite fit in my list, or I have something similar, or, what I always hear, the famous paranormal doesn't sell. I'm like, it doesn't sell because you guys won't take any.
It's selling pretty well for indie authors.
Exactly. And it's like, well, maybe take one, see how it sells. I understand there's tropey stuff, and I found a werewolf one, which I usually don't. I say, please don't send me witches, warlocks, werewolves, vampires, zombies. But I read one from one of our indie authors, actually, that she came in as an indie, and I thought she put a nice twist on an old trope, and it came close at Macmillan, but didn't quite pass the finish line. But, it happens.
So what should an author do with these rejections? I mean, I find being an indie author very empowering because I don't have to ask permission. Any success and any failure is entirely my fault, basically, and no one's in control except me. And so I can just keep trying to make things happen. Obviously, the same as anyone else, some books sell better than others, but that's kind of the way it is. So I feel like I've never experienced the kind of rejection that people get submitting to agents or to traditional publishing. So how can authors deal with that?
It's tough. It's tough not to take it personally, but I have to tell you, do not take it personally. I've seen them pass on brilliant writing and brilliant books, and it's either because they were so overwhelmed with the work on their plate already that they have their stable of agents that they want to look at, or they just weren't in the mood. I don't know. but it is not personal because, like I said, if it comes to me and I'm like, this kept me interested, I really thought this was great, and then I send it out and I'm dealing with the rejection along with everybody else. It's like, this is really good. Did you read it? But that's what happens when we're in a subjective industry. It's my fantastic as someone's like, eh.
Yes, exactly. It really is, isn't it? And as a reader, someone can say, oh, this is an amazing book. And I'm like, no, not for me.
I couldn't put it down. And you're like, I can't pick it up.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes I'll try books because they're just so popular. And then I'll be like, I don't understand why this is so big.
Oh, you don't know. Sometimes we have conversations, my partner and I are just, she's like, how did this get out there? But this won't go out. It's like, listen, we don't know what kind of blackmail's happening out there.
Yeah. What the hell is going
dirt
on?
People have on the other. I don't know. But again, it's subjective,
Yeah, and it's always changing. I feel like the other piece of advice is, well, just write another book, because as creative people, that's what we do. I feel like the more ideas I have, and the time problem is getting everything written, which I think is why, I do have two particular projects I am thinking of pitching, but the way I love to move on so fast, I was thinking, like, let's say this project I'm working on right now, let's call it the Vineyard book. If I finish that and then I pitch an agent, it might take, I don't know, 6 months, maybe never, obviously, but let's say it takes 6 months to get an agent, and then it takes 6 months to a year. You said 2 years to get a publishing deal, and then it takes a publisher a year, 2 years to get the book in the world. Is that about right?
Yeah, well, some of it, yeah, depending on how quick you get an agent, that's the first step. And then for it to go to publishing, you can hear back sometimes within 2 weeks of no thank you, or it could take a year. So it's somewhere in between 2 weeks and a year to hear back, depending on who you've sent it to and how much stuff is on their plate. And then if you do get, we'd like to greenlight this. And when I said it took me 2 years to sell something, it was like, because again, it's timing. And we talked about it may not be right now, but maybe it'll be right later. So it just took me 2 years of continuous that we sold it finally. And then she wrote her second book with them. So it's just finding the haystack, then finding the haystack with the needle in it, So, and then if you get a book deal, right now they are backed up to where it's taking about 2 years to pub. Unless they fast track you, which I haven't seen that lately.
And some people, I mean, you can get some money on signing, right? But then you get paid on publication.
Correct. It's half on signing and usually the other half on publication.
Yeah, so just keep that in mind, people, in terms of cash flow management.
or okay, not on publication. Let's just say on accepted final manuscript, but
they're in control of that. They can just send it back with some more issues, and that's not up to the author. They
usually try to drag it out.
But it's so interesting. Like, why are we in this industry, Renee? It's so hard
because we love it.
We love books.
But and back to one of your other points too, is your first book may not be your first book published. You might, it's like, I love your voice, I love your writing, the story, not so much. But send me your next project. That's what I'll tell them. And the next one might be a really great story. And then you send that one out. So they get their foot in the door. You get published on the second book you wrote, or third or fifth or 10th. And you get that first one out there. And then the publisher, if it sells through, you have to sell through because you won't get your second book in there if it doesn't. And now they've sold through and they say, what else are they working on? And then you go, here, I have these other options for you. And at that point, they'll be more apt to edit you or help shape up what it is that you sent.
You mentioned sell through there. Can you just explain that?
Sure. Let's say when you sell it, let's say you were given a $5,000 advance. The advance goes against, there's a price for your book. You get a percentage of that wholesale price. So it's not retail unless it's negotiated that way, depending. Let's just go with wholesale numbers. So you get the couple of points on the wholesale price, and that goes against your advance. So you have to sell X amount of books at 8%, usually, depending what you negotiate. And that goes towards that 5,000. And when you sell enough and that 5,000 is paid off, then you start seeing royalties.
Yeah, I think that's really important too. The word advance means advance against royalties, and yet people lose track of what that actually means. And in that case, it's really interesting because here in the UK, I have one author in mind in particular who got a massive deal, like really, really huge. And then we never heard from her again. Presumably because it didn't sell through. Whereas I know other authors who started on much lower advances, but sold through like multiple times. Yes. And then the next time they got a better deal. So it's hard to know, right? I mean, which way is a better way to go?
It kind of is. Well, as an indie author, you're not used to getting in advance anyway. So if it was a matter of between getting a lower advance and knowing that you could sell through and getting your royalties, there really is no difference, right? So it's 6 of one, half dozen of another. If you don't know that you're strong in the marketing aspect, I've had authors come to me from like St. Martin and whatever, and they didn't take his next book because they didn't sell through. And then he came to me without me realizing that. And then I found out real quick why. Because I sold the book and they did nothing.
Yeah, it is. And the industry, I guess the other thing is don't be an idiot, treat people nicely, because it's not that big an industry really, is it?
Mm-mm. You put your book out there, you always have to be selling. You always have to be working at it, building your platform, getting the word out. And I'm not that kind of person, which is why I'm off the grid. And I'm by referral usually only, or when I go to events and meet people, that's how I build my list. But it's always trying to get your book out there. And obviously, if you sell through, like I said, you've got it made. Also, what helps selling through that advance is if your book is right for other countries. They'll sell foreign rights and all those other things get an advance as well that goes to pay back the advance that they gave you, so you could you can earn out faster.
Fantastic. Well, we're out of time. I do want to just ask, if people want to pitch you, can you just maybe tell them what you are looking for in terms of clients for editing, or whether or not they can contact you?
Well, I'm usually into like really great writing, really good voices, and really great stories. I mean, there are more easy to tell you what I don't take. I'm not a big fan of the post-apocalyptic, depressing books, erotica, poetry, westerns, the vampire, zombie, etc. as previously. I find it very difficult right now for fantasy, like with elves and magic and that other world. For me, there's a lot of other agents out there that do very well with that. I just find that that's not really my thing. I do enjoy great chick lit, although the editors don't seem to. So I love humor if it makes me laugh, especially thrillers, mysteries, all that. Also, I don't do children's books, even though my career was in that. I don't take picture books or middle grade. I do handle YA, but again, it's got to be based on story. You know, that's the clincher.
Nonfiction, memoir?
Oh, absolutely. I do a lot of nonfiction. If you guys go to my agency site, ghliterary.com, you'll see the book covers that we've done. I've done a lot of nonfiction. If you go to reneefountain.com, you'll see under the tab of my work, and you'll see a lot of the books that I helped get out there and worked on proposals with the authors and edited the books, etc. And I think that's a great place to start there, because it kind of hones down to specifically me more on that site.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for your time, Renee. That was great.
I appreciate your time, and it was great to be here.
So I hope you found that episode with Renee interesting, and that it gave you some tips about thinking about your manuscript, and also considering how you might want to approach agents and traditional publishing if that's something you're interested in. Because as authors, we get to choose per book and per format and all of that, how we will get it out into the world, and per language, I should say that. You are in control of your creative business and intellectual property licensing. So get to know all of your options, learn about all this, and then make decisions that work for you. As ever, I love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment on the podcast show notes at thecreativepenn.com, or on the YouTube channel, or message me on X at thecreativepenn, or email me, joanna@thecreativepenn.com. Send me pictures of where you're listening. So next Monday, I'm talking about intuitive discovery writing and serial fiction with Kim Boo York, which is a super fun, creative discussion that I know you will enjoy, even if you are a plotter. In the meantime, happy writing, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. You can find the backlist episodes and show notes at thecreativepenn.com/podcast. And you can get your free author blueprint at thecreativepenn.com/blueprint. If you'd like to connect, you can find me on Facebook and X at The Creative Penn, or on Instagram and Facebook at JFPennAuthor. Happy writing, and I'll see you next time.